Hello, it is me again, Becky. Thank you for stopping by. Today, I am going to be sharing with you some fantasy romance duologies. Now, I saw Jess at Honest Fiction do one of these videos as well, so I will leave her recommendations linked in the description of this video if you want to go see what duology she recommended. Some of them I also really enjoyed, but I'm going to try and recommend totally different books than Jess, just so there's more of a variety if you want to check out her recommendations as well. All of these I have read and enjoyed, with the exception of like one sequel, but I will share that when I get to it. So first off, let's start with one of my favorite duologies from last year. It is a backlist fantasy romance series, and that is the Unicorn Bait duology by S.A. Hunter. This was published back in like 2012. It's an old series, but I reread it last year because I wanted to complete it. And boy, I had a grand old time with this series. It was hilarious, it was fun, it was lighthearted, it didn't take itself too seriously, but it had great chemistry between the characters, and I was just smiling so much when I read this. So in this, we are following this woman who is taking care of her grandfather's estate when she comes upon a unicorn horn. She pricks her finger and it transports her into this fantasy world. This fantasy world, don't think too hard about it. Don't think about how it's set up or anything like that, because it is not described all that well. The world building is not the point of these stories. It is the characters and the ridiculousness of it, okay? But anyway, she ends up in this fantasy world where she is mistaken as the princess of this territory. And this warlord guy captures her and forces her into an arranged marriage with him so that he can take over what he thinks is her kingdom. And she's like, dude, you got the wrong girl, it's not me. But she agrees to go along with this in the hopes that she can find another unicorn to send her back to the human realms. And in doing so, she realizes that she needs a virgin sacrifice. The only problem is she is not a virgin, and she's too kind-hearted to use like the virgin maids in the castle. But she realizes that her husband is a virgin, so she sets out to use him to lure a unicorn so that she can go home. But she ends up falling in love with him. And then in the second book, we're following the perspective of the actual princess that she was mistaken for in this one. And this princess is out for revenge because she thinks that what this main character had should be hers because she was mistaken for her. And it leads to some dragons being introduced into the story, and it leads into a bit of a marriage in trouble sort of situation. So if you don't mind reading backlist fantasy romances, if you don't mind just some fun, silly, goofy, make you smile, good chemistry, low smut type of fantasy romance, this is a really cute duology. I want to say they're available on Kindle Unlimited if you check them out, but these were some of my favorite books from last year. Up next, I have Heart of the Fae and Veins of Magic by Emma Hamm. Now, this is a duology that is set within a larger series. So it's called the Otherworld series, and it does actually have 4 other books in it. There's another duology. These 2 books are part of a duology, The Faceless Woman and The Raven's Ballad. And then there are 2 other books that are just standalones. But this is a fantasy romance series that involves some Celtic mythology, and in these 2 books, we're following a woman who is looking to find the cure for a sickness that is infecting her loved ones. And the Fae in here tell her that if she can go to this mysterious island that is hard to get to and bring back our male main character, that they will give her the key to curing her family. So she sets out to do this. She ends up finding this mysterious island, and she sets out to convince the male main character to help her in this. But he's a stubborn ass, and he wants no part of this at all. So this is a bit of a Beauty and the Beast retelling as well. Our male main character, he has geodes that grow out of his face whenever he gets cut. So he is just a man made of rock and gemstones, which everybody finds really ugly about him, especially himself, but she actually finds it beautiful. So I absolutely loved this duology. I got caught up in it. I loved the Celtic mythology that was in here, and I thought the characters had really good chemistry. And then in the second duology within that series, we are following a witch who has been cursed so that nobody can see her face. but our male main character is able to see through that spell, and so they end up traveling through the underworld, and he is keeping some secrets from her that might have something to do with his lineage as well. And things happen that lead to them being put under a curse together, to the point where she is a swan and he is a raven, but they can never be human at the same time, but for a brief amount of time. So how is their relationship gonna survive that? You have to read to find out. This duology I actually liked a little bit better than the first duology in this series, just because it had that Swan Lake retelling to it, and I really liked it. Sort of had like a Hades and Persephone vibe to it, but not really. But I loved the characters in this, and I felt the chemistry much more with them. So if you are looking for something with some Celtic mythology, definitely check out the Otherworld series by Emma Hamm, and the first 4 books. Each set is a duology. Another duology that is one of my favorites, I think this actually made my favorites of 2023, and that is the Savage Seas duology by Rebecca F. Kinney, The Teeth in the Tide and the Demons in the Deep. So this is a merman fantasy romance, and when I say merman, I mean the male main character is the merman, and it is his romance, which I thought was really unique. You don't often see a lot of fantasy romance that focus on the male point of view as the character that's looking for the love interest. It's usually the female. But in this, we were following a merman named Rake, who grew up in this very abusive, sexually abusive underwater world where he was used as nothing but like a stud to breed other mer people. And he finds out that he has fathered a son, and he wants to get his child out of this civilization. He does not want his child to grow up to be abused the way he was. So he sets out to try and find a way to grow legs so that he can approach the humans on land and give his son a fighting chance of living a better life. But the people on land do not like these mermaids. They are known as killer mermaids, and they tend to kill anybody who enters the water. So naturally, the first human he encounters is this young woman whose father was killed by these mermaids. So she is out for revenge. And you would expect the main romance in this series to be between him and her, but it's not, which again, I found very interesting. I really loved this. I thought it was such a unique concept. It had some sci-fi elements to it as well, which I found really interesting. So if you are looking for a merman fantasy romance, I highly recommend checking these out. I do believe they are on Kindle Unlimited, so if that interests you, snag them. Next up is another seafaring duology. I only have the first book, though. This is the duology where I didn't really like the second book. But that is A Ship of Bones and Teeth by Karina Halley. So the first book, you could totally read this first book as a standalone, but it does have an interconnected sequel to it called can't remember the name of it, but I did not like this one. But I loved this one. So this is a Dark Little Mermaid retelling. Got a lot of mermaid duologies now that I'm thinking about it. But in this, we are following Marin, who's essentially Ariel, and she wants to give up her life underwater for romance. So she makes a deal with the Sea Witch to, help her with this, and she ends up falling in love with Prince Eric. But this book starts about 10 years into their marriage, where Eric has been an abusive dick, and so she is looking for any means necessary to find the Sea Witch to try and get back her fins so she can leave his ass and go back to the waters. And in doing so, their ship gets commandeered by Captain Ramsey, who has a bit of a dark nature to him, and he is insanely attracted to Marin, and it's their romance. So this was a fun time. It's a bit smuttier than the other fantasy romances that I have shared with you, so keep that in mind. But this was just fun. I loved the characters. I loved the chemistry. The smut was fun. The different dynamics on this pirate ship were entertaining as hell. And I had a grand old time with this. And if you liked this and you wish to continue on to the second book, the second one is following Marin's sister and her relationship dynamic. So you don't have to read them in order, but if you just read this one, there's going to be some character relationship dynamics that take place in this one that might be a spoiler, so just keep that in mind. this next series is a series that is consisted of duologies within a series. So I think there's 3 separate duologies, but they all sort of take place in the same world and they sort of all interconnect in a slight way. And that is the River of Mists series by Marina Simcoe. So the first duology is The Serpent's Touch and The Serpent's Claim. This is a bind-up of the first 2 books. And in this, we're following this young woman who was raised in this, like, freak show menagerie. And she's a very quiet, very docile, very submissive young woman. She's been abused a lot. And when this mistress of this carnival brings in this new exhibit that is this Gorgon, she ends up befriending him, and they work together to find a way to get him back to his Fae realm where he is a prince, and their romance evolves from there. So they are Fae, but they're different types of Fae. So in this duology, he is a Gorgon, which is like Medusa, you know. She can't look at him, otherwise he will turn her to stone, which makes for some interesting romantic dynamics. And I really liked her character growth within the series because in the first book, she is a very meek and docile character, while in the second book, she really takes on a role of her own and gains her confidence. But this was my favorite duology within the series. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was such a fresh new idea on Fae. And then another duology within the series is Fire and Stone and Hearts on Fire. So this is a gargoyle? This is a gargoyle dragon fae story, which is a unique combination of the 2. I've never seen dragons and gargoyles combined into one creature before, but here we are. And this is about a young woman who is commissioned to steal this gargoyle. And when she does, she ends up releasing this man who ends up being a dragon shifter fae prince. And much like the first book, they have to end up finding a way to get him back to his Fae realm, where he is also part of a royal family. So both of these take place in the River of Mists world, but they are duologies, and you can read them as standalone. There's nothing too spoilery that would connect them unless you're really, really paying attention. There's like a small little detail. There is a third duology in this as well that follows like a avian Fae, but I didn't love that one as much. So, but there is that third option. Okay, and finally, we're gonna go back to the aquatic side of the duology, where I'm going to share with you, what the hell's the name of this duology? The Seas of Caledonia? I'm probably saying that wrong. But it is The Siren's Mutiny and The Captain's Revenge by Jessica S. Taylor. So this is a siren ship captain fantasy romance. And in this, we are following the siren named, is it Brigid or Brigide? I'm not sure. But she's always been told that men are evil and she needs to just kill them. But she's out swimming one day and this shipwreck occurs and she ends up saving the ship captain. And in doing so, she ends up being ostracized by her siren family and she's told that she needs to go and live by herself. But something ends up happening and she ends up being injured and found by the ship captain that she saved. And he takes her and helps her get better, and in doing so and being forced together, they end up discovering that they have a link somehow. And that the stories that she's always been told might not be the entire truth. And they both have a similar viewpoint on the world that leads to them teaming up to save something. So they end up falling in love. I really loved this. I really like Jessica S. Taylor's writing. I thought the chemistry was a great slow build. And again, I'm always down for like a siren ship captain type of romance. So if once again you're looking for a seafaring fantasy romance, here you go. So those were my recommendations for some fantasy romance duologies. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these, if any of them sparked your interest to add to your TBR, or let me know what your favorite fantasy romance duology is. But if you don't want to comment that but would like to let me know you made it to the end of this video, could you leave me like a boat emoji, because I recommended a lot of seafaring fantasy romance duologies unknowingly. But with that, thank you so much for watching, and until my next video, go read a fantasy romance duology. Bye!